Thank you for being here with me today. Stay with me until the end of this story, and please leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I need to know I'm not the only woman who's had to learn this lesson the hard way. My own daughter looked at me across a courtroom and said the words I'll never forget. She's not in her right mind, Your Honor. She's grieving and confused. She needs to be protected from herself. She said this about me. Her mother, the woman who taught her to read, who worked double shifts at the hospital so she could go to summer camp, who held her hand through 3 miscarriages and a divorce. And 6 weeks later, when she and her brother and sister showed up at my farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania with a moving truck, ready to clean out the barn and put the property on the market, they found my estate attorney sitting at my kitchen table with a thermos of coffee and a folder thick enough to choke a horse. The looks on their faces when she opened that folder, I will carry that memory with me to my grave. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the morning that broke something open inside me, because this isn't really a story about a will or a farm or 3 ungrateful children. It's about the day I finally understood what I'd been teaching them their whole lives, and what it had cost me. My name is Harriet Bellwether, and I'm 69 years old. I live in a small town called Cedar Hollow, Pennsylvania, about 2 hours west of Philadelphia, where the cornfields stretch out to meet the Allegheny foothills, and everybody still waves at you from their pickup trucks. I worked as a labor and delivery nurse at St. Margaret's Hospital for 38 years before I retired. I delivered probably 4,000 babies in my career. My husband Walter died of a heart attack when he was 52 and I was 46. I never remarried. I raised our 3 children alone after that, on a nurse's salary, and I thought I'd done a fine job. It was the second Wednesday of April when my phone rang at 6:15 in the morning. I was already up, drinking coffee at the kitchen table, watching the cardinal that comes to the feeder every spring. The caller ID said my brother Russell, and I knew before I answered. Russell never called that early. Never. "It's Cheryl," he said, and his voice was thick. "Harriet, she's gone. The aneurysm. She didn't make it through the night." Cheryl was our baby sister, 63 years old, the healthiest one of us. She'd just sent me a postcard from a hiking trip in the Smokies the week before. I sat at that kitchen table with the phone pressed to my ear, and I could not make my brain understand the words Russell was saying. He was crying. He was telling me about a phone call from her husband Marvin at 3 in the morning. He was saying funeral arrangements and Cheryl's children flying in from Denver. And I was watching that cardinal eat sunflower seeds and thinking about how Cheryl had taught me to ride a bike when we were little, and how she'd been the one who drove 11 hours to Pennsylvania the week after Walter died, and how I had not seen her since Christmas. After I hung up with Russell, I sat there for a long time. The coffee went cold in my mug. Eventually, I picked up the phone and called my oldest daughter, Margaret. She's 46 now, a partner at a consulting firm in Washington, D.C. Always was the driven one. Phi Beta Kappa from Georgetown, MBA from Duke, the whole show. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. "Mom, it's 6:30 in the morning. Is everything okay?" I told her about Cheryl. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear it cracking. "Oh, Mom, oh, that's awful. Aunt Cheryl. God." There was a pause. I could hear her husband Tom saying something in the background. "Listen, Mom, I'm so sorry, truly, but I'm walking out the door for a flight to Charlotte. I have a board meeting at 11. Can I call you tonight?" "I'll call you tonight, I promise." I said, "Okay." I said, "Of course, go to your meeting." She hung up before I could ask her to come for the funeral. I called my son Beauregard next. We named him after Walter's grandfather, but he goes by Beau. He's 44, lives in Atlanta, works in commercial real estate. The phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message. I said it was important. I said, "Please call me back." I tried not to sound like I was begging. Then I called my youngest, Felicity. She's 41, teaches 3rd grade in a suburb of Chicago. She had always been my soft one, my sweet one, the daughter who used to cry when she saw roadkill on the highway. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was distracted. I could hear her getting her own kids ready for school. The chaos of a Wednesday morning. "Can this be quick?" Tucker has a science fair project due, and we still need to glue stuff to a board. Felicity, honey. Aunt Cheryl died last night. There was a pause. Oh no. Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. The aneurysm. Russell just called. The funeral's probably going to be this weekend in Roanoke. Mom, she lowered her voice. I can't this weekend. Tucker has the science fair, and Mia has a swim meet on Sunday, and Brendan's already taking Friday off for a work thing. I just can't. I closed my eyes. Felicity, she was my sister. I know, Mom. I know, and I loved her too. But I can't fly to Virginia this weekend. I just can't. Can you understand that? I said I understood. What else was I going to say? I sent flowers, my voice tinny and far away. I told her to give Tucker a kiss for me. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and waited for Bo to call back. I waited until 8, until 9, until 10:30. Around 11, I picked up the phone and called him again. Voicemail again. I sent him a text. Cheryl passed away. Please call me. I love you. He texted back 20 minutes later. So sorry, Mom. In a meeting all day. Will call when I can. Love you. I sat in my kitchen until the sun moved across the room and shone on the wall where I keep pictures of all of them. Margaret in her cap and gown at Georgetown. Bo in his first suit. Felicity holding Tucker as a newborn. All those summers at the lake when Walter was still alive. The Christmases. The piano recitals. The graduations. I had been there for every single one of those moments. I had driven through snowstorms and worked night shifts and packed lunches and stayed up late and held heads while they vomited and listened to their broken hearts. And not one of my children could rearrange a single thing in their lives to grieve with me for an hour. Bo called me back the next morning at 6:45. He was on his way into the office. He sounded tired. Mom, I'm so sorry about Aunt Cheryl. Truly. Are you doing okay? I told him the funeral was Saturday in Roanoke. I told him I was going to drive down and I'd love it if he could meet me there. Mom, I want to. You know I do. But I've got 2 closings this week and we're short-staffed because Patterson's on paternity leave. Saturday is just impossible. Can I send something? Flowers? A donation in her name? Anything? I said flowers were fine. I said I'd handle it. I said I'd be okay. You're the strongest woman I know, Mom. Aunt Cheryl was lucky to have you for a sister. I hung up before I started crying. I didn't want him to hear me. I drove to Roanoke alone, 8.5 hours each way. I stayed in a Hampton Inn off the interstate and I went to the funeral in a navy blue dress I'd had for 15 years. And I stood next to my brother Russell and our cousin Lorraine, and I held Cheryl's husband Marvin while he sobbed. Her 2 daughters were there. Cheryl's daughters. Both flew in from Denver with their husbands and their teenagers. They had each other and they had me, the aunt who showed up. We sat in a booth at a Cracker Barrel after the service and ate meatloaf and told stories about Cheryl. And Cheryl's older daughter Bryn reached across the table and took my hand and said, "You're the closest thing to her I have now, Aunt Harriet. Don't be a stranger." I cried the whole drive home, 8.5 hours of crying. When I pulled into my driveway, it was after midnight, and there were no porch lights on at my house except the one I'd left on for myself. Nobody knew I was home. Nobody had thought to check. The next morning, I sat on my front porch with coffee and watched the sun come up over the back pasture. We've got 86 acres out here. Walter and I bought this place 43 years ago, when we'd only been married 5 years, and Margaret was a baby. It was a falling-down farmhouse on land nobody wanted because the soil was too rocky for serious farming. We rebuilt every inch of it together. Walter did most of the carpentry himself. The barn, the wraparound porch, the kitchen cabinets, the fence around the orchard. He died before we finished the screened-in sleeping porch on the 2nd floor, and I finished it myself, with the help of a contractor named Earl who used to be Walter's poker buddy. I sat there that morning and I thought about Cheryl. I thought about how she'd called me 3 times the week before she died, and I'd only answered once because I was busy with grocery shopping and a doctor's appointment and a meeting at the church. I thought about how I'd told her, "I'll call you back this weekend, Cher." And then I hadn't, because life is busy. because there's always something. And now she was gone and I would never hear her laugh again. And I thought about my own children, about how their voices on the phone had sounded exactly the way mine must have sounded to Cheryl. Distracted, polite, loving in the abstract. I thought about every time over the last 15 years that I had called one of them just to hear their voice, and they had let it go to voicemail because they were in a meeting or running errands or putting the kids to bed. I had told myself they were busy, successful. That's what I'd raised them to be. But sitting there on my porch, I started to wonder if what I'd really raised them to be was unavailable. To me, to each other, to anyone whose need didn't fit conveniently into their calendar. I had a niece up in Roanoke who'd just lost her mother and was already asking me to come visit, and I had 3 children of my own who couldn't be bothered to come to my sister's funeral. I got up off that porch and I drove into town and I made an appointment to see a lawyer. His name is Conrad Wexler. He's 72 and he's been practicing law in Cedar Hollow since before I moved here. He drew up the will Walter and I made together back in 1996. He had been the executor of Walter's estate. I sat in his office on a Friday morning the week after the funeral, and I told him I wanted to change my will. Conrad listened to me without interrupting. He's good like that. When I finished, he was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "Harriet, are you angry or are you certain?" "I'm both," I said. "But I've been angry for a long time and I never did anything about it. The certainty is new." He nodded slowly. He pulled a yellow legal pad out of his desk drawer and uncapped a pen. "Tell me what you want." "I want to leave the farm to my niece Bryn, Cheryl's older daughter. She and her sister Tessa will split the house in town that I inherited from my mother, plus whatever's left in my retirement accounts after taxes. My grandchildren each get a college fund of $40,000 set up in trust so their parents can't touch it. My children each get $15,000 and one of Walter's personal items. That's it." Conrad set down his pen. "Harriet, this is a significant change. I want to make sure I understand. You're cutting your 3 biological children out of inheriting any real estate, the bulk of your assets, and the family farm. You want it all to go to a niece who lives in Colorado." "Yes, they will absolutely contest this. You understand that." "I know." "Then we're going to do this right. I want you to get a full cognitive assessment. I want a video deposition explaining your reasoning. I want documentation of your relationship with each of them over the last several years. Phone records, text messages, emails. We're going to make this thing airtight." I told him I had a binder. Conrad raised his eyebrows. "A binder?" I told him I kept a paper journal of every phone call I made to and from my children, going back about 6 years. It was a habit from nursing, documenting everything. I had dates, times, length of call, who initiated it, and a brief note about what was discussed. I had every text message backed up. I had birthday cards I'd sent that had never been acknowledged, and Christmas presents that had never been thanked for. Conrad smiled for the first time in our meeting. "Harriet, you might be the best client I've ever had." I went home that afternoon and pulled out the binder. I sat at my kitchen table and I went through it page by page. 6 years of calls. The numbers were not subtle. Over 6 years, I had initiated 847 phone calls to my 3 children combined. They had initiated 142 to me. And of those 142, I noticed something I had never noticed before. I went back through and I counted. 126 of those 142 calls had been because they needed something. Money for Felicity's IVF treatments. Help with childcare when one of Beau's deals fell through and he had to fly to Texas at the last minute. Margaret asking me to fly to D.C. to dog-sitter purebred Bernese while she and Tom went to Tuscany for an anniversary trip. The roof on the lake house in the Poconos that we all still co-owned, even though I was the only one who paid the property taxes. 16 calls in 6 years that were not about something they needed. 16. I sat with that number for a long time. 2 weeks later, I had my cognitive assessment with a neuropsychologist in Harrisburg. I scored in the 97th percentile for my age group. The doctor laughed and said, "Mrs. Bellwether. If anything ever happens to you, I want your brain donated to research. A week after that, I made the video deposition in Conrad's office. I sat in front of a camera in a blue blouse and I talked for 43 minutes about my children, about my life, about the choices I was making and why. I cried twice. I did not edit it out. The will was finalized and filed on the last day of May. Conrad called me to tell me it was done. You're a free woman, Harriet. I didn't feel free. I felt sad and angry and tired and just a little bit terrified. But I also felt, for the first time in a very long time, that I had made a decision based on what was actually true, rather than what I wished was true. I called Bryn that night. I didn't tell her about the will. I just asked how she was doing. We talked for an hour and 20 minutes. She told me about Cheryl's garden, which she was trying to keep alive, and how her own daughter had started high school that year and was being awful to her in the particular way teenage girls are awful to their mothers. I told her about my own daughters being awful to me at 14. We laughed. We cried a little. Before we hung up, she said, "Aunt Harriet, would it be all right if I came to visit you this summer? Maybe in July? I just feel like I need family right now." I said yes. I said yes, please. The summer went by quietly. Bryn came in July like she'd said she would, and she brought her teenager Maddox, who turned out to be a sweet kid once you got her away from her phone. They stayed for 9 days. Bryn helped me weed the vegetable garden. Maddox figured out how to fix the Wi-Fi extender that had been giving me trouble for months. We drove out to the Amish bakery in Intercourse one afternoon and bought too many choufle pies. On the last night, sitting on the back porch with citronella candles burning, Bryn cried and told me she'd been struggling since her mother died, that she felt unmoored, that being here for these 9 days had been the first time she'd felt anchored to anything in months. I didn't tell her about the will. In August, Margaret called me. It was a Sunday afternoon. She wanted to talk about the lake house in the Poconos. The roof needed replacing, and the dock was rotting, and the whole place needed to be repainted. And what was I planning to do about it? I told her I wasn't planning to do anything about it. The lake house had been in my name and Walter's name. After he died, it was in my name. I had been paying the property taxes on it for 23 years, and I was the only one of us who used it anymore. And now I was 69 years old and my hip hurt when I climbed the stairs to the loft, and I thought maybe it was time to sell it. There was a long silence on the other end. "Sell it?" Margaret said. "Yes, sell it." "Mom, that's a family asset that's not just yours to sell." "It is, actually. Legally, it is. You can't be serious. We grew up at that lake house. The grandkids love it. You can't just decide to sell it without consulting us." I held the phone away from my ear and I stared at it. Then I put it back to my ear and I said, "Margaret, when was the last time you were at the lake house?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, 3 years ago, the 4th of July. "And how often have you helped me pay for it in the last 23 years? She was quiet. "That's what I thought. I'll let you know what I decide." I hung up. She called Beau and Felicity, of course. I knew she would. By Tuesday afternoon, I had voicemails from all 3 of them. Beau saying he wanted to talk about the lake house. Very calm, very professional. Felicity in tears saying I couldn't just sell their childhood. Margaret again, this time leaving a longer message about how we needed to have a family meeting to discuss estate planning. I didn't return any of the calls. By Friday, Margaret had created a group text with all 3 of them and me. It was titled Mom's Future. Reading those messages in the group chat over the following 2 weeks was one of the most clarifying experiences of my life. They talked about me like I wasn't there. They talked about the farm like it was already a real estate listing. Margaret had pulled comparable sales for our area and shared a spreadsheet. Beau was suggesting we list the farm with a particular agent he knew in Lancaster who specialized in high-value rural properties. Felicity was crying in text form about how she didn't want to be the one who had to have the hard conversation with me about my declining capacity. My declining capacity. My declining capacity. Capacity. My phone had been logged into this group chat the entire time, and they kept forgetting and saying things like, "Mom won't see this," and "Is the chat muted on her end?" Felicity even sent a screenshot of an article about how to convince an elderly parent to move into a memory care facility. I am 69. I have no memory issues. I run a mile and a half every morning around the back pasture. I read 3 books a week. I do the New York Times crossword every day in pen. But to them, I was already gone. I was just an asset, waiting to be liquidated. The thing that finally broke me happened on the 3rd Saturday in September. I was in the basement of my farmhouse, moving a box of Walter's old fishing gear so I could get to the dehumidifier, when my back went out. Not a little tweak, a full lockup. I went down on the concrete floor and I couldn't get up. The pain was so bad I couldn't catch my breath. My phone was in my pocket. Thank God. I lay there on the cold floor and I pulled it out and I looked at it for a long minute. Then I called my children. I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't call 911 first because I wasn't sure if it was that bad yet, and because some old animal part of me, the part that was 69 years old and alone in a basement, just wanted my babies. I called Margaret, voicemail. I called Bo. He picked up. "Bo, honey, I'm in the basement and I can't get up. My back, I think you need to come." Mom, slow down. Are you hurt? I can't move. Did you call 911? Not yet. I called you. There was a pause. A long pause. Mom, you need to call 911. I'm in Atlanta. I can't get there fast enough to help you. Hang up and call 911 right now. I'll get on a plane as soon as I can, but you need help now. He was right, of course. He was absolutely right. I hung up and I called 911 and an ambulance came 20 minutes later and they had to use a stretcher to get me up the basement stairs. They took me to the hospital in Lancaster. I had a herniated disc. Not surgery required, but bad. They kept me overnight for observation. I called Bo back from the hospital that night. I told him where I was. I asked if he was getting on a plane. "Mom, are you stable? Are you going to be okay?" "Yes, but I'm going to need help for a few weeks. The discharge nurse said I can't be lifting anything or driving." "Mom, here's the thing. I literally cannot leave Atlanta this week. I have a closing on Tuesday that's been 6 months in the making, and if I'm not there, it falls apart. Can Margaret come? Or Felicity?" I called Margaret. She had a board retreat in Aspen. She offered to send a meal service. I called Felicity. She offered to fly in for 48 hours over the weekend if I could pay for her flight. But she had to be back by Monday for parent-teacher conferences. I told her not to bother. I called Bryn. She was on a plane to Pennsylvania the next morning. She stayed for 3 weeks. She drove me to physical therapy. She did my grocery shopping. She made beef stew and froze it in single-serving containers so I'd have meals for after she left. She slept in the guest room and she got up at 5 every morning to let the chickens out, and she didn't complain once. On her last night with me, we were sitting on the porch again and she said, "Aunt Harriet, can I ask you something that might be out of line?" "Always." "Where are your kids? I know they have busy lives, but you're hurt. You needed help. Where are they?" I told her I didn't know. I told her I'd been wondering the same thing myself for the better part of 40 years. She reached over and took my hand. She said, "My mom used to say you were the strongest person she knew, but she also said you were the loneliest. She used to worry about you." I cried. Bryn cried. The chickens clucked around in the dark. 2 days after Bryn flew home to Denver, I got a certified letter in the mail from a law firm in Philadelphia. It was a petition. Margaret and Bo, with Felicity's signature underneath, were petitioning the Pennsylvania court system for an emergency guardianship over me. The petition cited my recent fall, my increasingly erratic financial decisions regarding the lake house, my isolation from family, and my concerning attachment to a distant relative who has been spending excessive amounts of time at the property. A distant relative. They meant Bryn. I called Conrad. He was at the office within an hour of my call, even though it was a Saturday. He read the petition twice. Then he started laughing. Actually laughing. Harriet, they have made a serious tactical error. How so? Because of the cognitive assessment, the video deposition, and the binder. Because of every text message you have backed up. Because their own group chat will be subpoenaed. And they have been openly discussing how to liquidate your assets. They have walked into a trap they built themselves. The hearing was set for the second week of November. In the weeks between, my children tried everything. Beau flew up to visit me, the first time he'd been to the farm in 2.5 years. And he sat at my kitchen table and told me he loved me and he was worried about me, and he just wanted what was best for me. And wouldn't I please just consider signing power of attorney over to him voluntarily so they didn't have to drag this through the courts? I said no. I served him pot roast. I sent him home. Felicity called me crying every other day. She said she didn't even want to be part of the petition, but Margaret had pressured her. She said she loved me. She said she was sorry she hadn't come to Cheryl's funeral. Margaret didn't call at all. She communicated through her lawyer. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Conrad had prepared me thoroughly. The judge was a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s named Hortense Dobbins, and she did not appear to be impressed with my children's attorney. She watched my video deposition. She read my cognitive assessment. She listened to my own attorney play short clips from voicemails my children had left me over the previous 2 years, voicemails I'd saved without realizing how useful they would be. The most damning piece of evidence was the group text. Conrad had subpoenaed Felicity's phone records because Felicity had the worst encryption settings. Every message in Mom's future was entered into evidence, including the screenshot Felicity had sent about memory care facilities, including Beau's message that said she's sitting on close to $2 million in real estate that's just rotting out there. This is the time to act. Judge Dobbins denied the petition. She also ordered my children to pay my legal fees. She looked over the top of her glasses at the 3 of them, sitting at the petitioner's table, and she said, "I have rarely seen a more transparent attempt to seize a parent's assets under the guise of caretaking. Your mother is not only competent, she is more competent than I have been on most days of my professional life. I suggest you take this as a learning opportunity." I walked out of that courtroom with Conrad on one side and Bryn on the other. Bryn had flown out for the hearing. It was 3 weeks later when my children showed up at my farmhouse with the moving truck. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. I had been expecting something. I just didn't know what. Conrad had asked me to call him if anything strange happened, and when I saw the U-Haul coming up my long gravel driveway with all 3 of their cars behind it, I called him from the kitchen. "They're here," I said. "All 3 of them. A moving truck. I'm 30 minutes out. Do not let them in until I'm there. Do you understand? Do not open the door." I didn't have to. They had a key. Margaret had a key from years ago when she used to come up to help with the canning. She let herself in through the side door with all of them behind her, and I stood in my own kitchen and watched my 3 grown children walk into my house like they already owned it. "Mom," Margaret said. Her voice was that careful, calm voice she uses on her firm's most difficult clients. "We need to talk. You need to leave. Mom, we lost the hearing. We accept that. But you have to understand we are still your children, and we still have to deal with the reality of your situation. You can't run this farm by yourself. It's 86 acres, Mom. You're 69. We're here to help you figure out what comes next." I told them I had already figured out what came next. I told them they could either get out of my house or they could wait until my attorney arrived to explain it to them. Margaret laughed. She actually laughed. "Mom, we brought a truck. We're going to start clearing out the barn this weekend. There's stuff in there from before Dad died. We can't keep putting this off." That was when Conrad pulled up. I had never been so glad to see another human being in my life. He came in through the side door without knocking, and he set his briefcase on my kitchen table, and he opened it, and he pulled out a folder thick enough to choke a horse. The thermos of coffee I mentioned earlier? He'd stopped at the diner on the way. That was Conrad. "Hello, everyone," he said. "I'm Conrad Wexler. I'm Mrs. Bellwether's attorney. I think it's time you all sat down." They sat. Margaret in the chair where Walter used to sit, Bo across from her. Felicity at the end of the table, already crying. Conrad opened the folder. He explained that the farm and the bulk of my estate would, upon my death, pass to my niece Bryn Whitlock of Denver, Colorado. He explained that the house in town, which my mother had left me, and which they had all assumed they would inherit, would be split between Bryn and her sister Tessa. He explained the grandchildren's college trusts. He explained that each of them, Margaret, Bo, and Felicity, would receive exactly $15,000 and one personal item of Walter's. He explained that the will had been signed in May before the petition, and that any attempt to contest it would trigger a no-contest clause that would reduce their inheritance to $1 each. The room was so quiet I could hear my own refrigerator humming. Margaret found her voice first. "This is insane, Mom. This is insane." "It's not insane," I said. "It's the most sane I've been in 20 years. You're giving the farm to Bryn?" "Bryn? She's not even your daughter. She's barely your niece. She came when I broke my back. You didn't." "I had a closing," Bo said. He stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "Mom, you cannot give Aunt Cheryl's daughter our family farm. This is our childhood. This is Dad's land. This is Dad's land," I said. "Your father and I bought this together. He left it to me. I get to decide what happens to it." "You're being vindictive," Margaret said. Her voice was shaking now. "You're punishing us because we didn't come to Aunt Cheryl's funeral, because we didn't drop everything when you fell. We have lives, Mom. We have careers and children. We cannot drop everything every time we have a crisis." I looked at her for a long time. "Margaret, listen to me. Listen to what you just said." "I'm listening." "You said every time I have a crisis. My sister died. I broke my back in a basement. Those were the 2 times I'd called you in the last 3 years and asked for something. Those were my crises, and you're calling them every time." She didn't have an answer for that. Felicity was sobbing now. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have signed the petition. Margaret made me. I told her it was wrong." "Felicity," I said, "you are 41 years old. Nobody made you do anything." Bo put his face in his hands. I stood up. I walked over to the window and I looked out at the back pasture where the golden road was going to seed. I thought about Walter, about the day we closed on the farm and walked the property line together with Margaret in a baby carrier on my back. I thought about Cheryl and Bryn and the long quiet weeks of physical therapy. I thought about all the calls I'd made and all the calls I'd missed. I turned around. "I'm going to tell you something," I said, "and I want you to really hear me. I am not punishing you. I am not vindictive. I am not declining. I am clear. For the first time in maybe my entire adult life, I am completely clear about who I am and what I am willing to accept from the people I love. And I am no longer willing to be the person who calls and calls and calls and gets voicemail. I am no longer willing to be the person whose grief is inconvenient. I am no longer willing to be the woman who saved every birthday card you ever sent her because she had so few of them." Margaret was crying now. Quietly, not the performative crying she'd been doing earlier. Real crying. "What can we do?" Bo asked. "You can leave my house. You can take your moving truck, and you can go home. And then, if you want to, sometime in the next year you can call me. Not because you need something, not because you want to know what's in the will. Just to talk. Just to be my children. And if that happens, regularly, over the next year, then maybe we can start something new. I'm not promising the will change. I'm not promising anything. But I'm telling you that I am still here and I am still your mother. And if you can find your way back to me as a person and not as a payout, then I will meet you there." They left. They took the truck. Margaret didn't say goodbye. Felicity hugged me, and her shoulders were shaking, and she whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." Bo kissed the top of my head before he walked out the door, which he hadn't done since he was 16. Conrad and I sat in my kitchen after they were gone. He poured both of us coffee from his thermos. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I just had surgery without anesthesia." He nodded. Will they come back? I asked. I don't know, Harriet. Some do, some don't. The ones who come back are the ones who needed to hear what you just said for a long time. It's been 14 months now since that Tuesday. Felicity calls me every Sunday. She has not asked for anything. She tells me about Tucker's science class and how Mia's swim times are improving. Sometimes she just cries and tells me she's sorry. Bo came up in February and helped me with the spring planting. He stayed 5 days and he did not check his phone the whole time. He told me his marriage was struggling, the first honest thing he'd said to me in maybe a decade. I told him I was sorry, and I listened. Margaret has not called. Not once. I don't know what that means yet. I'm trying to make peace with not knowing. Bryn comes twice a year. She's going to inherit this farm. She knows that now. She and I have started planning what the property will look like when it's hers. She wants to keep the orchard. She wants to convert the old hay barn into a guest house. She wants her sister Tessa to be able to come out and have a place to grieve their mother. I will be in the ground by then. But it makes me happy to know it. I never had that kind of legacy with my own children. I am building it now with my sister's daughter, and the building of it is sweeter than I knew it would be. My name is Harriet Bellwether. I'm 69 years old. I was the woman everyone called when they needed something, and nobody called just to say hello. I did that to myself, partly. I taught them that I would always be there. I taught them that my love came without bills attached. And maybe that was a mistake. Maybe love that costs nothing teaches the people we love that we are worth nothing. I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. But I know this. I am no longer the woman who drives 8.5 hours alone to bury her sister and comes home to a dark porch. I am not that woman anymore. And if it took losing my children, or losing the version of my children I had invented in my own head, to become someone else, then that is the cost of the truth. And the truth, it turns out, is worth more than the farm. I sit on my back porch most mornings now, and I think about that cardinal at the feeder, the one I was watching when Russell called to tell me Cheryl was gone. I think about how many small moments I missed in my own life because I was busy being available for everyone else's. I think about how, for 40-some years, I confused being needed with being loved. They're not the same thing. I learned that too late, but I did learn it. There is a quiet kind of cause and effect at work in a family. The lessons you teach with your actions are the lessons that take root, not the ones you teach with your words. I told Margaret and Bo and Felicity every day that I loved them, but I also taught them, with every dropped plan and every sacrificed weekend and every checkbook opened without question, that I would always be there, and that being there cost me nothing. Of course they came to believe it cost me nothing. I had made it look effortless. The effort was invisible, so the gratitude was invisible too. That is on me as much as it is on them. You reap what you sow, and I sowed a garden where I was the soil, not the gardener. What I am trying to do now, in whatever years I have left, is grow something different. It takes a certain kind of honesty to look at the people you raised and admit that you did not raise them as well as you thought. That is the hard, clear-eyed work of being a grown person. It is what I should have done when they were 30, and I was still answering every call. It is what Cheryl tried to tell me in her quiet way the last few times we talked, and I did not listen. I think the 3 things I want for anyone watching this, and for myself and for Bryn and her daughter, are these: the strength of character to do the right thing even when nobody is watching and nobody will thank you for it. The good sense to see a situation clearly, including your own part in it, instead of telling yourself the story that lets you off the hook, and the steady, plain endurance to keep showing up for the people who actually show up for you, even when your back hurts, and your sister is gone, and the house is dark when you come home. I did not have those things in the right measure for most of my life. I had too much endurance and not enough clarity. I had a kind of goodness that was really just self-erasure. I am working on it. I am working on it the way you work on anything worth working on, which is slowly and badly and with a lot of false starts. If you are listening to this and something in it sounds familiar, I want to say to you what nobody said to me. You are allowed to be a person. You are allowed to expect from the people you love what you have given them, and the truth, even when it costs you the farm, is always worth more than the lie.